Person is. Come on. This is Yvonne Ridley. She was a journalist, okay? And if most of you can remember, well, most of you would have been young at the time, she was captured by the Taliban. This is when the invasion of the Westerners went into Afghanistan. She was imprisoned. She was given a Quran to read. She read the Quran, and within a couple of years, she actually embraced Islam. Okay? Now, some of the mythologies you have about why white females are embracing Islam, they try to make out the media that the women who embrace Islam in large numbers in this country are usually uneducated, and this is not true. This is an educated woman. Does anybody know this person? Bilal Philips. Yeah, you can speak up, it's okay. Bilal Philips. Born in Jamaica, raised in Canada. He embraced Islam in 1972. He went to Medina University to study Arabic. And at the time in the 1970s, there was very little literature in English about Islam. When I came into Islam in the early 1990s, there was very little literature. You could just imagine there was hardly anything translated. One of the things that he wanted to do, he learned Arabic, and he started translating a lot of the classical works into English for new Muslims. And for many people who came from Muslim communities who didn't have this sort of literature at all. Because most of the literature they would have had was the Hadith and the Quran, you know, the traditions of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Quran. But very little literature on other issues. So this is what he done. He was a communist before he became a Muslim. So you're going to see how people come from diverse backgrounds. Anybody know who this person is? No? Abdullah Qayyum. He is from North America. He's Native American mixture, as well as Barbadian. Married to a Jamaican woman. He ran the Jamia Mosque, large mosque in Toronto. I think he was in Toronto in Canada. He was the first one in the 1990s to establish an Islamic social services, okay? This is really important, when he got the academics and the educated people from the Muslim community to come to deal with issues pertaining to Muslims who were living in the West. Because a lot of immigration had taken place during that particular time. Okay, he does a lot of talks. He's an excellent speaker, a historian. He actually studied with Bilal Philips in Medina University, and Abdullah Qayyum was the first Westerner to graduate with a diploma in Arabic. This is in the 1970s. Does any person know who this is? No? You must be a young audience. Laura Booth. This is the sister, Sherry Blair, is married to obviously the former Prime Minister, Tony Blair. Okay, so what you're seeing here, you're seeing different people from different backgrounds within the Western world who are now embracing Islam. And anyone know who this person is? Malcolm X, thank you. I already gave a talk about him last week, so I won't reiterate any more about who he was or what he done, but he was probably one of the greatest orators in the 20th century. He was unique in a particular sense, where he was able to speak to the educated and the lay person simultaneously. Very articulate, memorized the dictionary, memorized every single word in the English language, and the man was very articulate. By the time he came out of prison, he was in prison for approximately 8 years. By the time he came out of prison, he had the knowledge to equivalent to a person of 4 PhDs. This is what he was able to do. He gained his education within prison. This person here, Muhammad Ali, another great orator. So what you're seeing here, educated people, whether they were educated before Islam or after Islam. And this is what I want to emphasize within this presentation. You're not just dealing with idiots or foolish people, you're dealing with people who are studying this religion and trying to look for answers for their life. That's the whole point why people are reverting or converting to Islam. This person here, Cat Stevens, he embraced Islam around about the 1970s and 80s, a British musician. This person here, Sinead O'Connor, another musician. She took Shahada, an Irish singer, songwriter, activist. She took Shahada approximately 4 to 5 months ago. Okay, this woman, she was a feminist. She'd been looking for answers for a long, long time. Okay, and she's now finally found peace within herself. This person here, Maurice Bucaille, French. He was the person who studied Arabic, and he translated some of the ayats from the Quran, into French, which was later translated into English, looking at the scientific miracles within the Quran. How did the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ know about certain events 1400 years before Western scientists were able to find this information out? How is he able to know this? And this is what spurred him to embrace Islam. And the last person, Dave Chappelle, a comedian. Okay, so here you have diverse people from different forms of communities, lower class, middle class, educated, uneducated. So you're dealing with a different variety of people, who've embraced Islam over the last, how many years? 60, 70 years. Now, one of the things that reverts do not like is for us to be described as reverts, like we're just new Muslims. Like I said, I've been Muslim for like 26 years. And if you study the history of Islam, one of the things that you will notice or know, or you'll recognize, that when the Sahabas or the companions of the Prophet Muhammad themselves embraced Islam, you don't really hear about this concept of new reverts or new Muslims, okay? This is a recent thing. They saw themselves as Muslims. And this is something that sometimes we take exception to, in most cases, that we're new Muslims. No, we are Muslims. Some of us have been Muslim, like myself, I've probably been Muslim longer than all of you sat here, okay? We know that many people who were born into Islam do not even practice until they actually get older, where they actually make that choice. And we're seeing these things, so many people from established Muslim communities, re-embracing Islam, okay? But we never hear them coming up here giving talks of the difficulties which they had and how they returned back to their deen, back to that natural way of life. We never hear this, but they are reverts themselves, okay? They are reverts themselves. So let's have a look at what some of the stuff we're going to discuss this evening. I know we got short time, so we're going to look at what testimonials by non-Muslims, what they said about the Prophet Muhammad, looking at his behavior, his conduct, his character. And I think this is important, because this is one of the things why many people embrace Islam themselves. The position of women in Islam is the most controversial issue. And I'm going to show you how Muslim women were the most liberated women even till today, where most Western women are still fighting for things that Muslim women have had for over 1400 years. One of the reasons why I took this section out to insert into my presentation, because as a lecturer and as a public speaker, whenever we have events like this, the majority of the people who turn up are women, Muslim women. So I thought it would be only fair to focus on them for a little while through this presentation. And we're going to look, if we've got time, to look at science and education. And these are some of the aspects I want you to consider, to reflect on, and to contemplate as I'm going through this presentation. We're going to look at the spiritual, the religious, the academic, the social, the political, the anthropological. Now, let's have a look at some of the conjectures that is stereotyped or labeled within Western society. These are the things you will hear constantly through the media, tabloids, television, okay? And at the same time, with this onslaught towards Islam, people are still coming in crowds. Why is this? These are questions we need to ask ourselves. Islam was spread by the sword. If I have time, I will show you where certain non-Muslims of the 18th century, the 19th century, have actually claimed that Islam was not spread by the sword themselves. And these were academics, intellectuals, erudites of the Western world. They oppressed their women. They want to take over our country. And the list just goes on, and I'm not going to read through it, but I want you to focus on this for about 30 seconds and look at these sort of statements which we heard before 60 years ago, and we are still hearing now. And people are still coming in crowds. Why is this? Why are people being put off with these things? Because the more we see this onslaught, people are taking an element of agency, whereby they're going, they're studying, and then they're trying, and they're reflecting, contemplating, and then they decide to embrace the deen. So sometimes these negative things are actually bringing more and more people into Islam. Now let's have a look at what non-Muslims say about Muhammad. Lamartine, he wrote a book in 1856 called The History of the Turks. One of the things that he noticed, that whenever the Muslims conquered particular lands, regions, whatever the case may be, one thing that he noticed that the Muslim would say, we bear witness there's only one God, and that Muhammad, peace be unto him, is his messenger or his final messenger. This is what he studied when he was looking at the history of the Turks. And this is what he said about Muhammad. If greatness of purpose, smallness of means, and astounding results are the three criteria of human genius, who can dare to compare any man in modern history with Muhammad? He's daring the Westerners to bring about the best person in their society to compare to the character and the behavior of this individual. And this challenge has been set since the 1800s. And people have come and they have not been able to develop or to envelope those characteristics. Greatness of purpose, what the man set out to do. Smallness of means, he had hardly anything. You know, when you look at leaders, that they usually have to have some form of influence, usually finance. This man didn't have any finance. Even though he was married to a rich woman, he didn't live off her. He did not live off her, okay? And he called people in their crowds. So this is what Lamartine is suggesting and saying. He's not just a historian, he's looking at critical aspects of his behavior and character, and how he was able to amount males as well as females, boys as well as girls, because it wasn't just adults who were embracing Islam during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. It wasn't. There was children themselves who were embracing Islam. And this is something which is sometimes forgotten within the Muslim community. The children, younger than teenagers, were embracing Islam during the time of the Prophet. And we're seeing it happening in the Western world even till today. Then we got the likes of Stanley and Poole, who wrote about the history about the Moors in Spain. These are two of his books. And this is what he says. I'm not going to read it, I'm going to let you read this. Yeah, because I want to try to get through as much of the slides as possible. But one of the things I want to emphasize while you're reading this is the way in which the best intellectuals of British society or the Western world, how they pose particular questions, pose particular answers, challenge their readers to look further into the conduct, the behavior, and the characteristics of the Prophet Muhammad himself, peace be unto him. So this is some of the reasons why many non-Muslims embrace the deen. Why? Because of the leader, so-called founder of this religion. How did he treat children? How did he treat women? Okay? You will find no one in history besides, outside the way of the prophets who treated women, children, and the most vulnerable people like this person here. Then we got Lieutenant General James Gavin, who wrote a book. He didn't write a book. There was actually articles in Time magazine around about 1974, 1975. And out of everything, he basically said that Muhammad was one of the great leaders. And then he said Jesus later on. This is a Christian saying this. Okay? These are people who come from a particular religious practice, who's coming outside and being critical and being as objective as possible, irrespective of the stereotypes and the labels that people themselves in the West are putting towards Muslims. So this is a really important factor for us to know, to read about, and I say to people, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim, to read about the character of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be unto him. Why did his followers love him, respect him? Why? Yeah, this is really important. And to find out whether the followers of people today, or people which died in the First World War, Second World War, respected their leaders as if, any more than how the followers of the Prophet Muhammad respected him. You will not find this. And this is the challenge that non-Muslims, are saying to their non-Muslim counterparts. about this person who they claim was great. Then we have another book which was written in the 1980s, Michael H. Hart, 100th ranking most influential people in history. He went from the prophet Adam, peace be unto him, all the way to people that lived during the 1980s. And he picked out the 100th most influential people. And the conclusion he came to was that Muhammad, peace be unto him, was number one. Okay? And he said the reason why he chose Muhammad as number one, because Muhammad himself, peace be unto him, did something that no other influential character in this book had done. What? He was successful in the religious as well as the secular endeavors. The religious and secular. This is what he says. Being critical, being a historian, and being objective. So what does that say for us as Muslims and non-Muslims? We should be successful in the religious as well as the secular endeavors of our life, experiences, the way we conduct ourselves. Then there was a lot of controversy. This was after 9/11, where you had particular individuals who were presenters, who were basically turning around and saying things such as, Muslims are this, Muslims are that. I'm not going to read this out because it's quite disturbing what this person, Kilroy, used to have he was like the Jeremy Kyle of the 1990s, okay? Or the noughties, okay? And this is the sort of thing that he's saying on national television, okay? And it was disturbing for the BBC, where the BBC had to force him out because he was lying. He was lying. Okay? Some of the stuff that he said, it was clear that this individual didn't know nothing about history, didn't know nothing about the Muslim contribution to Europe as far as science and erudition was concerned. The Muslims were the first people to start and open up universities in Europe. There was only 2 universities in Europe. The Muslims had brought into Europe 17 universities. So how can you make a statement like this? That the Arabs themselves, or Muslims, have not contributed nothing, or cannot contribute anything to Western civilization, or to the British so-called imperialistic empire. This is a lie. And this was embarrassing. And this is supposed to be an educated person. And that's the problem sometimes with educated people, where they do not use their intelligence enough to be critical and objective, yeah, before they make statements. Let's look at the position of Muslim women in Islamic culture. Okay, so what you're going to find now is that Muslim women were liberated women. Now, before the event of Islam, before the 7th century AD, there was one group of women who were as close to the Muslim women as far as liberty or liberation was concerned. And this is what you find in ancient Egyptian society and Cushitic society, in ancient Nubia, which is now where they call Ethiopia and Sudan. Okay? No women after that, no women before that, yeah, or after that, had reached that greatness except during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be unto him, and the female followers within his community. This is really important for us to acknowledge and important to know. Because when we look at academia today, we look at some of the way in which feminists like to critique things, they seem to want to omit these things from history. These are records which were not just kept by Muslims, these are records that are kept by non-Muslims. So why are they brushing over this reality? So these are just some examples. Bilqis, Queen Candace, okay? These were female leaders. You've got the likes of Queen T. She's a mother of Tutankhamun, Akhenaten, and now they're saying that she was probably the daughter of the Prophet Yusuf, the Queen T. Okay, she was the first Secretary of State, not Marilyn Albright. Yeah, she predated her at least 2,000 years before Marilyn Albright even came onto the scene, at least. We're talking about 1400 BC. That's about 3,400 years before America was born, etc. She was a Secretary of State, speaking to the Persians, to the Assyrians, to the Babylonians, She was the power behind the throne. And we know about the likes of Hatshepsut. Okay? But what I'm trying to show you here, before the advent of Islam, there was a period in time where women were liberated and they were the pinnacle of their society. And one of the things within African society which existed up until the time of Islam was that African civilization, culture or society was a matrilineal system. You could not be a pharaoh unless your mother came for the royal family. This is really important. And it's from this lineage we then get the Arabs themselves. Hagar, who then moved to the Arabian Peninsula, she's the mother of the Arabs. Okay? So we need to study this and understand this. Okay? This is really important for us to know, and sometimes we've brushed over this reality. This is talking about the Kentakes. Now the only thing I want to emphasize here about the Kentakes, known as Queen Mother, these were rulers, these were very, very important figures within society. Do you know that two of these rulers actually fought Alexander the Great and defeated him? And Augustus Caesar defeated him? Did any of you know this before? But these are supposed to be the greatest military generals, and females defeated him. So this is really important for us to acknowledge, important for us to know. Women's rights, Muslim women's rights after marriage. She can keep her surname or maiden name after marriage. Do you know in the Western world that women are still struggling for this? The nearest they've come to is the hyphenation, where they keep their name and they hyphenate and put their husband's name at the end. Muslim women were able to keep their names after marriage. She's not the property of her husband. So what feminists are trying to brush over, and what feminists want, Muslim women have had for 1400 years. This is important for us to acknowledge and important for us to know. She can keep her wealth after marriage. This never really came about, really, in this country until approximately 1881, 1882. Because the woman was the property of her husband. Yeah? And if she was the property of her husband, her wealth was his property. Because she belonged to him, her wealth belonged to him. And she took his name. Muslim women had that at least 1300 years before that period. Why don't we know about this? Why is it that the Western society has brushed over this reality? The sad thing about it is that Muslim women themselves don't really know. Why is this? They have a great history. Even non-Muslim women are starting to talk about these things within universities slowly, of trying to, because they're peeling back the layers and they're finding things which are shocking to them. Inheritance before and after marriage. This is something which has only become relevant in the Western world for Western women since the 1960s and 70s. But it never proliferated or increased until around about the 1980s. So in the last 30, 40 years, women are getting this. Muslim women have had this for 1400 years. So this is what Islam has done. This is some of the reasons why white females are embracing Islam. Okay? They're peeling back the pages of history to see what is there, placing themselves there. And what they're looking for in today's society, which men are not giving them, Allah Himself has given them this. Men cannot give you your rights, and they never will. It has to come from the divine. It has to. Women's contribution. This is another form of contribution which most people don't know. The Querouin University in Fez, in Morocco, was built by the finance, the money, and the wealth of a Muslim, Fatima Al-Farid. Okay? She built this institute. Now, this institute is over 1,000 years old. Western women are talking about being part of university, etc. Have they built anything long-lasting and standing like this? This is really important for us to acknowledge and to know. has had a university, the faculties which were financed in those universities was actually financed by a Muslim woman. This actually shows that the wealth of women was now being put into society, developing the social, the academic, the educational, as well as the spiritual elements within that particular region. And then you've got the University of Sankore, which is in Timbuktu, which was the leading university. So you've got the first two universities that are over 1,000 years old. Over 1,000 years old. And Muslim women could be professors within university. Professors. We've only seen female professors really and truly in the last, 30, 40 years. Right, I think that's the only time I've got. What I'm going to do, I'm going to open up the floor to questions and answers, and then we can try to finish it off, hopefully. I hope I've done justice to the talk. I know it was only